Hello, hi, it's me, Crystal. So I wanted to talk about querying today, and I was going to talk about like reasons why you may send out a query letter and then not get any interest or requests from agents that have nothing to do with the quality of your book. Of course, it could be your book, it could be, people are not connecting to the plot or to the characters, or your writing is extraordinarily bad. But I wanted to focus on the reasons that don't have to do with the quality of your book. And what has inspired me to want to talk about this today is that I have written a query for what I've just been calling Ari story, or my Ari story, because my main character's name is Ari. And I wrote a query for that. This video is going up on Monday. I wrote a query for that on Friday, and it's really good. It is the best query that I've ever written. And so in true me fashion, I wanted to analyze why this query was so much better than a lot of the other queries I've written in the past. And in doing that, I've also come to the realization that the query for winter it's not as good as I thought it was. It was good on paper, but it's not really all that good, like in application, if that makes sense. And so, but I've already sent queries out for that. I sent out all the queries that I'm going to send out. I think I spent, I don't know, it was at least 3 hours sending out queries. I sent them out. I think I spent 3 total days sending queries out, and on like non-consecutive weeks. So I send out a bunch of queries, and then the next day I sent out some more queries, and then I think the next week I sent out the rest of the queries that I was going to send out. And so there isn't anything I can do about it now, but I did want to kind of like analyze that query and like try to figure out like why I thought it was a good query, and then like why it probably is not like such a great query when it's too late for me to do anything about it. And like I would probably normally be more upset about it, but I'm not, for a couple of reasons. One, I have Ari's story that I'm currently working on, which I'm very excited about. And I also now have the query for Ari's story, and like I said, it is good. So I'm very excited to send that out and see what happens whenever I get the story done. And the other reason I'm not upset is that I think I talked about this before, but I knew going into winter, like back when I was working on the rewrite, the first draft in the first place, I knew going into it that it was not going to be the easiest thing to pitch. And so I was already mentally prepared. I do think it was good that for me to just go ahead and try, because I think that like writing and editing and writing a synopsis and a query and then getting my agent list together, I do think all of those things, it helped get everything moving again. And so I feel like I don't think the query for Ari's story would be as good as it is if I hadn't written this other query first, and I hadn't like gotten all those writing gears like moving again. My writing gears, my editing gears, my synopsis and query writing gears, my submitting and getting rejected gears. If I hadn't gotten all those gears moving again, I don't think the story would be as good as it is, and I don't think that the query and the synopsis for the story would be as good as they are. So I wanted to talk about kind of like just briefly kind of like some reasons why your query may not drum up any interest, and then I will talk about what I think based on anecdotal evidence and experience and a couple of query seminars. One query seminar and a query panel that I've been to in the past. So just like taking all of that information and talking about like what you want your query letter to cover, and like kind of the response that we are hoping to invoke from our query letters. Obviously, the point of our query is to get somebody to read more of our story. It's like, it's the bait to like draw people in, as the breadcrumbs to like tempt people to your creepy house in the woods. But then your book, your actual book, your story, has to like do the hooking and like do the rest of the work. But if you can't get people to read your book, then it doesn't matter how good your book is, right? So you need to get people to read your book. So a couple of reasons why you may not get requests that have nothing to do with the quality of your book. It could be, the market. Like if you are querying, like this happened to me in 2012, if you're querying a vampire book during peak Twilight hysteria, when the market is extremely oversaturated with vampire books and vampire romance books, you're going to have a really hard time getting your book published unless you are already established author or you already have an ongoing vampire series or something, and then you could have it be a hard sell for other reasons. Like if you are writing a historical romance / murder mystery / sci-fi, that's going to be a harder sell than like just a historical romance or like just a sci-fi romance, right? So if you have all these extra things going on, that can make your book a harder sell. If you have, like a situation where your main character is a teenager, like what I have going on with Winter, and it's not a YA book because it doesn't have a YA tone, it doesn't have a YA theme, and it doesn't fit in the YA category, it can be a hard sell to get something like that into the adult category. And so sometimes it's like your story is getting rejected just because it's going to be a very hard sell and the agent is just not passionate enough about your story and your characters, to go through all of that. Go through everything that they need to go through to sell your book to editors and stuff. So, and another reason why it could just be, it's just their subjective taste. Maybe, they're building up a different part of their list right now and they're focused on, say like sci-fi books, and they're not taking on like a lot of like fantasy books or like suspense books or something, or vice versa. It could be just like subjectively, they're not finding it interesting. They're not connecting, to the plot, the characters, the story. Maybe they don't do your genre at all, and maybe you thought they did, or maybe they do fantasy, but they don't do like your specific subgenre of fantasy, or they're just not interested in the way your story sounds in general, whatever. There's subjective taste, there's the market, and those are some reasons that, your pitch will get rejected or not drum up any interest that have nothing to do with like the quality of your story or even with the quality of your query letter. Okay, so the main reason, though, people don't get requests and they don't drum up any interest for their story is their actual query letter. It could be because it's confusing. It could be because it's full of technical and mechanical errors. I sent a query out once upon a time that had the wrong name on it. Every single time I send queries out, I make a mistake. This last time, the mistake was that, there were 2 agencies where I accidentally queried 2 agents at that agency, not the same day, but it was like when I was going back and I was sending out that last round. It's like, you're looking at a lot of pages. I was just looking at like things that I had flagged, and I wasn't double checking to see if I had, like there were some agencies where I had flagged multiple agents at that agency. I didn't double check to make sure that I hadn't already queried an agent at that agency. And so I accidentally sent out queries to 2 agents at the same agency around the same time. But as far as mistakes go, I'm like, that is far less horrifying than other things that have happened in the past, where like you've had formatting issues and your query comes out and it's just like this big lump of text and nobody's going to read that, or like I said, accidentally addressing your query to the wrong agent. So, I always double check everything, and I also always email my query to myself to check the formatting, because that was the 3rd time I queried. That was like 2009. It was a bit ago, but it's still really funny. Anyway. Yeah, so the main reason, though, why you don't get any interest is because your query is confusing. Like I said, there's errors or something. Your story sounds like it's a hot mess, or just generally does not sound interesting, or like something the agent is personally interested in. The point of your query is to, give like a very brief but interesting and intriguing synopsis of what your story is about, because the point of your query is to get them to read your sample pages or to get them to want to read your book. and then your book is, so it's like your query is like the bait that you're using to get their attention, the breadcrumbs that you're dropping to lure them into the forest towards your creepy house in the woods. And then like your story is like the creepy house in the woods. Your story is the hook, and that's going to be the one that is going to have to do the work, to actually, get you an agent. But it doesn't matter how good your story is if you can't get anybody interested in reading it in the first place. So I have some notes on what you want to cover in your query, and then, yeah. So like I said, the point of your query is to get people to read more, is to get the agent or the editor reading your query to want to read your sample pages and to want to read your book. And so you want to answer, certain like questions to like help people understand what your story is about and what's going on. And you want to like raise questions that they want answered, not like literal questions where you literally say, are they going to get out of this alive? Like, that's boring. You want like the implied questions. You want them to be reading it and thinking, oh my gosh, how did they get out of this mess? Or I want to know more. Like, you want the questions to be implied, and you want, to invoke the questions and raise them up in their minds. Okay. And of course, the questions get answered by reading your sample pages and reading your book. And then hopefully your book is good enough to get you an offer. Okay. So these are the things you want your query to cover. There's basically 4 questions you want to answer. Who is this book about? Who or what do they want? Who or what stands in their way? And what happens if they fail? These last 2 points need a little bit more explanation because sometimes it's just not that simple. So first 2 points are pretty straightforward. Who is your book about? What does your character want? Like, what is the point of them going on this journey in the story? So if you have like, like historical, like murder mysteries are really popular right now. If you have a story about a character, you have like this high society lady. And so you want to say, high society, divorcee Annabelle, is taking a walk through the garden one day and she stumbles upon a dead body. So what she wants is to figure out who killed this person, and who she is she's a high society lady set in the past somewhere. And that also adds a little bit of easy world building too, which you're always going to have to do. You need to set, you need to make sure people know when they're reading the query, like what time this book is set. So like modern day, in the past, in the future, whatever. And so then the last 2 points, and who or what stands in their way, this can also be like who or what complicates things, So like in our example with the high society lady finding a dead body, what complicates things is, the person who's dead is, the husband of her best friend. And so suspicious. So it's a high profile dead body that's in the garden. That's what's complicating things. And so what happens if they don't work through these complications? So like what happens if they fail? What happens if they don't work through these complications? Are reputations going to be ruined? Is she, in investigating this murder, is she now drawn the attention of the actual murderer and now they are coming after her? So has she put her life in danger, by trying to figure out what's going on? So again, you don't want to like ask the question directly. You want to imply. You don't want to be vague. So like you don't want to say, one day she goes out into the garden and she gets a surprise, and then it might be connected to somebody she knows, and did somebody see her find the body, or did whatever. Like, you don't want to be vague like that. You want to be specific, so that it's interesting without like giving everything away, So you want to say she goes out and she finds a dead body in the garden. It's the husband of her best friend, and so it's like, and now she's receiving threatening notes and she's being stalked and now her life is in danger, that kind of a thing. So hopefully by the time you finish the query, the person reading the query will be like, oh my gosh, how to get out of the situation? Oh my gosh, what's going on? You want to imply that there's a much bigger story here than what you have on the page, than what the summary isn't entailing, breadcrumbs. yeah, so you want, things to be clear and interesting and intriguing and not like confusing or vague. Because if it's confusing, they're going to be confused. They're not going to keep reading. Nobody cares. If it's vague, it's not going to be interesting enough, and it's not going to like drum up, the desire to read more. I've back in, like over the years of me giving like feedback to people and people giving feedback to me, this has been one of the things that has been difficult for people, is that, a lot of times like they think that they are explaining things, but they're not. And vague is not interesting. So if somebody is reading your query and they're like, what's going on? Like, that's not the response you want to have. The response you want to have is, oh my gosh, what is going on? I think that makes sense. Okay, so quick progress report for Ari's story before I leave. I am in the home stretch. I have 4 days left in the story. The story ends on Thursday. And it is Monday. So very, very close. We have a lot of stuff going down over the next couple of days. A lot of very exciting things. And so I should be able to finish it in this week. Fingers crossed. And yeah, so I'm anticipating my first draft to be about 110,000 words. And then we will see what word count I end up with when I'm done editing. But I'm expecting to cut some words and see if I can get it down. Usually I add words when I'm editing, but my goal when I'm editing this is to try to get it down closer to 100,000. But yeah, we'll see what happens, but I'm very excited about it. And yeah, so I just wanted to talk about this. And yeah. And hopefully this makes sense, because there's a lot going on in my head and I'm not sure that this makes sense, because one of the reasons I wanted to do this video is because I was analyzing all of this stuff, and then I started analyzing, like I said, the query I sent out, and I made some notes for basically why I think my query for winter is not as good as I thought it was. And basically, just in a nutshell, it's because I do kind of answer like, who is this book about, and what she wants, but it's not as clear as I thought it was. Like, it's clear what Annalena wants, but I focused, it was kind of like a weird omniscient query. And so I kept talking, and I did this in the synopsis too, and I don't know why. I kept talking about, my main character, who's in this book, her name's Annalena. I kept talking about her and her friends together. And this book is not about her and her friends. It's just about her. Her friends are important, but I end up talking about them as a group, which I think it's going to end up reading not very interesting to people, because instead of me just focusing on Annalena and what Annalena wants and how, things are being complicated for Annalena, I'm talking about, Annalena and her friends and how things are complicated for this entire town. And it's not very personal. And so I don't think I did a good job in talking and making it personal. And also, I just think with the last 2 points with, the what is complicating things and what happens, if they don't work through these complications, that is extremely vague. And like I said, it sounds interesting on paper. I think if I read my query off, it would be like, oh, that sounds interesting. But like I said, you don't want like an agent, because agents are reading a lot of queries at one time. A lot of times they don't just like read one at a time. Sometimes like they just go through their slush pile on like Fridays, and they're going through like 100 queries in 15-20 minutes. And it sounds scary, but that is the reality of the situation. And so interesting is not good enough. You want them to stop and want to read more. So if they just read it and they're like, oh, that sounds interesting, you want them to stop and be like, oh, that is interesting, Okay. And I am not sure that I got the second response with my winter query. I think anybody reading it is just going to be like, oh, okay, You know, it's not going to be the worst thing that's in their inbox by a long shot, but it's not going to be the best thing either. And I don't know if I said this at the beginning of the video or if I said it in the previous one when I was filming earlier and I wasn't actually recording, but the reason why I'm not upset about it is for a couple of reasons. One is I do have, you know, Ari's story. I'm still working on. I'm very excited about it. I'm so in love with it. And so that helps a lot. I also have the query for that done and I'm very excited to like send that out and see how that does. And then the other reason why I'm not upset about it is because I knew going in to winter that this was going to be it was going to be hard for me to pitch this, and I knew going in. That's one of the reasons why I picked this story, because there was no pressure on it, you know, because I'm like, I didn't have to worry about pitching it, because I'm like, I may like change my mind and not pitch it anyway. Now, I am glad I decided to go ahead and query it, because I don't think my query for Ari's story would be as good as it is if I didn't have all these gears running again. So one of the really good things about winter, other than the fact that I also really enjoyed writing that story, is that it got my writing gears moving again. It got my editing gears moving again. It got my synopsis and query letter writing gears moving again. It got my, you know, submitting things and like getting used to being rejected gears, you know, it got all that moving again. And I think all of that was really good stepping stones, you know, for this current project and for future projects. And so it's like I don't think Ari's story would be as good as it is. I don't think the synopsis and the query letter would be as good as they are if I didn't have the stepping stones I had laid out with winter first. And I didn't want to not query it, because like, just because something is going to be harder for me to pitch to somebody, I didn't want to not query it, because I think I just feel like if I didn't try, then I would be upset with myself. I'm like, so at least this way I can say I tried, and that's all I can do, you know. And I feel much better trying to, you know, pitch the book and trying to get an agent with this book or whatever than I do not trying, because if I don't try, then I'm always going to be in my head thinking, well, what if I could have gotten that book published? What if I could have gotten an agent with it? And then there would be more pressure on Ari's story. And instead, strangely enough, there's no pressure on Ari's story, because I have this out already. And so it's like, okay, well, I have this, I submitted this story, and so now I'm moving on to submitting this story, and so there's no pressure on that, because I don't know if that makes sense, because it's like there wasn't any pressure on winter either, but there was more pressure on winter because it was my first time. It's my first time going back into the query trenches in years, you know, and so, you know, it's like I got all that anxiety and anxiousness and worry out of the way. And so now I just feel like I just feel better, if that makes sense. Maybe it doesn't make any sense. Okay, why don't I stop this video before everything becomes convoluted? But anyway, so I've sent queries out. I should be finishing Ari's story maybe this week. And I'm very, very excited, and hopefully this video makes sense. And feel free to drop a like or comment on this video, or subscribe if you're not subscribed if you feel like it. And I will see you guys in the next video.